Welcome back, A-Pushers. Today we're going to go over Harry S. Truman, who was president after Franklin Delano Roosevelt's death, and he really gets us started with the Cold War. He's also my state, Missouri's only president. So here we go. What you need to know is World War II. FDR is very secretive about information, and he dies basically at the very tail end of World War II. It's a shock to America, and Truman goes to see Eleanor Roosevelt, and he says, "Ma'am, is there anything I can do for you?" And she's like, "No, Harry, you're the one in trouble now." And later on that day, he actually finds out that the United States has nuclear weapons capabilities with the atomic bomb. But anyhow, let's get started over here with World War II. Victory in Europe. Only a couple months in to his presidency, and Harry S. Truman wins the war in Europe. The Russians and the Americans and our allies defeat the Nazis once and for all. And that leads you to the Potsdam Conference, where Truman, our buddy Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin get together and they plan for what Germany will look like after World War II, and it's the denazification of Germany. And basically what's very clear is it's going to be divided between East and West. On the East, it's going to be the communists and the Russians. On the West, it's going to be the Americans and our allies. Also, with this, you have the Nuremberg trials, as I erased the TV there. The Nuremberg trials is putting Nazis on trial for crimes against humanity. And the war in Japan in the Pacific, it's not over yet. Japan has not yet surrendered, even though the Nazis are defeated and Hitler has committed suicide. Basically, it takes 2 atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The United States dropped this because it's going to probably cost at least 100,000 more lives if we're going to invade Japan, and it's going to probably realistically cost closer to 1 million lives by the time it's all said, done, and over with. And so we have these weapons at our disposal, and we decide to end this war once and for all. We didn't start this war, we didn't ask for this war, but we will finish it very aggressively. So it leads you to victory in Japan. Japan unconditionally surrenders, and it leads you also to the Tokyo trials. It's basically a repeat of the Nuremberg trials, except it's in the Pacific theater. Japan officials are being put on trial for crimes against humanity. And ultimately you have the United Nations, which is an international peacekeeping organization. It's very similar to the League of Nations, except now it has more power and more clout. And yes, the United States joins this time. We didn't join the League of Nations with Woodrow Wilson, but we do join the United Nations. Okay, moving up to the Cold War. Basically, you get done with World War II and you think, oh my gosh, peace, happiness, tranquility. Well, not so much. Basically, Harry S. Truman invites Winston Churchill to speak in Missouri at a college called Westminster College. And he gets up to the podium and he delivers what becomes known as the Iron Curtain speech. The original name is the Sinews of Peace speech. And basically he says, across Europe, an Iron Curtain has descended. On the east is going to be the communists and the Russians, and on the west is going to be the Americans and our allies and Western culture in general. Freedom versus the tyranny that happens under communism. Stalin is not pleased with this speech, and George Kennan is our American minister to Moscow, and he says that the communists are trying something, they're plotting something, they are not to be trusted. And it leads to the Truman Doctrine, which if you get nothing else out of the Cold War, you must know the Truman Doctrine, which is containment of communism, and it impacts us everywhere in the globe. Containment of communism. And so we move over here with containment of communism. There's a couple ways you can do it. One, you can fight a war and blow things up. Or two, Truman wants to keep peace, and so he agrees to do it economically, because communism flourishes in places where the economy is bad and people are desperate. But if you get the economy good, people really don't go for communism so much. So the United States and Greece and Turkey, they're threatening to go communist. The United States is going to give them $400 million. That's $400 million. With the Marshall Plan, basically Europe is pulverized. Everything's in shambles. I mean, if you can see some of these pictures up here, you can see what Germany looked like after the war, after all the bombings and destruction. And so the United States, under George Marshall, our Secretary of State now, used to be our head of the Army Chief of Staff during World War II, he says, well, Europe is very important, and we, the United States, is going to give $13 billion to Western Europe and help in the development of it, and it's getting it back on its feet again, and it's ultimately very, very successful. We even ask Russia if they would like some money, and they say no, only because we said we'd give you money if they stop being communist. With the Berlin airlift, Germany is divided between East and West. Unfortunately, the capital city is in the East, and so even the capital city, Berlin, was divided between East and West. And Stalin, of course, doesn't want this little sliver of Western culture anywhere near him and his Eastern Germany. And so he cuts off all communication with us. And he also cuts off supplies. So people in Western Germany or Western Berlin are basically going to starve to death if something's not done. And so for 11 months, we fly supplies over and over and over. Every 30 minutes, there's a new plane dropping supplies. And basically, Stalin knows he's not going to win, and he basically opens up roads and basically pretends like nothing ever happened. He's not very pleased with us. Another thing you need to remember is that the United States, under the 4-point plan, is going to give another $400 million to underdeveloped countries, because underdeveloped countries have the risk of going communist because the economy is not very good, and so you give that in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. So underdeveloped countries. But $13 billion to Europe if you have to remember just one thing. Moving over here to NATO, it's the first peacetime alliance. The United States and our allies are going to join. It's the Western culture that is going to join in this club. The Warsaw Pact will be Russia's club with Eastern Bloc countries later on. NSC 68, it's the United States' new defense policy. Increase taxes, increase defense spending, because we've got a Cold War and we want to stay one step ahead of the Russians, and we've got the atomic bomb and they don't yet. All right? Japan, obviously they lose in World War II. We help create a new government. We create a new constitution for them. Their emperor is still in power, but he's only having symbolic power. Now they are a republic and a democracy. The Philippines, for their contribution to World War II, and because America doesn't want to appear to be very imperialist, we grant them their freedom, which is something they've asked for ever since the Philippine-American War. China, this is where containment goes a little bit sour for the United States. On one side, you have Chiang Kai-shek, who is the head of the Nationalist Party, and he's our friend. We support him 100%. And on the other side, you have Mao Zedong, who is a member of the Communist Party. Unfortunately, in 1949, China goes communist. And almost immediately, they start giving weapons and power to the Koreans. North Korea is going to invade South Korea. Just like Germany is divided between East and West, Korea was divided between North and South. On the North was the communists, on the South is our friends. So North Korea out of nowhere invades South Korea. Douglas MacArthur, who's in charge over there, says, Mr. Truman, Mr. President, I have a solution if you want to take it. I will drop 50 atomic bombs on Russia, or on China, and anyone that's loyal to China to end this thing. And Truman says, absolutely not. MacArthur goes out and kind of to the press and basically says Truman's an idiot and doesn't know what he's doing, and Truman fires him. But long story short, North Korea invades, but we do push them back across the 38th parallel, and it goes back to normal, what it was before. So containment so far is so good, except in China, which is a huge loss of territory. And Vietnam, France used to own Vietnam, and then World War II, they get conquered by Japan, and so Japan loses World War II, and then China and England come and kind of stabilize the region. This is before China turns communist. And Ho Chi Minh, who's the leader of the Communist Party, thinks that he's going to get his own country, finally get his independence for his people. Unfortunately, we put the French back in power, and then it's going to be the French versus Ho Chi Minh and his army of the Viet Minh. And the United States is going to give $1 billion to France to stop Ho Chi Minh from winning. Unfortunately, they're ultimately not going to be successful. Moving on real quick here, in terms of nuclear weapons, 1949, Russia gets the atomic bomb, and this puts Americans on red alert, red alert, red alert. In 1952, the United States develops the hydrogen bomb, which is 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb. And to put it in perspective, with one atomic bomb, you could kill 80,000 people. Now, multiply that by 1,000, and that's how many people you can kill. It's becoming a very, very dangerous world, and it will become more dangerous if the Russians develop this. And they will. Just give them about 2 years, and they will have a hydrogen bomb too. It's an arms race, and ultimately it'll be a space race. All right, let's look at the Cold War at home. If you need to know just one thing, well, ladies and gentlemen, it's the second Red Scare. Americans are afraid of communism. The Russians got the bomb. How did they get that bomb? Somebody talked, somebody snitched. Someone's trading something somewhere. Who's to be trusted and who's not to be trusted? HUAC is an organization, the House Un-American Committee, House Un-American Activities Committee, is going to investigate the film industry in particular and charge those people if they are communist or have communist sympathies. 10 people are going to be put on trial. They're called the Hollywood 10, and they refuse to speak whenever they're brought before HUAC. HUAC asks them, are you or have you ever been a communist? And they say, nothing. That's what they say. and so they're going to be blacklisted, which means that they are no longer going to be allowed to work in the film industry. The Smith Act was created during World War II, and the fear was that the government would be overthrown, so it was illegal to overthrow the government. Well, we used this in the Cold War against communists, so 140 people are going to be locked up. The McCarran Internal Securities Act is going to be approved by President Truman, and basically, or it's going to be, Truman's going to go against this, and basically what it said was that the United States, if you were a communist, you had to register with the government, and if there was a national emergency, you would be arrested. Truman thinks this is unconstitutional, but Congress is run by Republicans, and Truman is a Democrat, and he can't get his way. But Executive Order 9835, Truman says if you are a member of the Communist Party or a fascist, well, you can't work in government. You just can't. They're a danger to our national security interests. And you must, if you have a government job, take a loyalty oath saying that you aren't a communist nor have ever been a communist. And the big important piece here is that you must swear to uphold the United States Constitution. Alger Hiss is going to be a man that works for Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the Great Depression and World War II. And he is going to be put on trial because he was trading secrets and information with Russia. He's going to be put on trial by a guy you should know, Richard Nixon, who's later going to become vice president and then president. McCarthyism, Joseph McCarthy is a senator from Wisconsin. He says that he has 205 names of known communists in the government. Americans start freaking out, the list goes up, and ultimately it starts dwindling down to about like 57 people. Americans are questioning each other. It's hysteria. It's like the Salem witch trials with paranoia and craziness all over again. The Rosenbergs, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, are two known members of the Communist Party. They had connections with the U.S. government, and they are going to be executed because Julius was selling secrets to the Russians, and that information is in the Venona Papers, which is a list of him and a bunch of other communists that are endangering the American system. So anyhow, what you need to know, it's like Sacco and Vanzetti in the 1920s. If you're the Communist Party or a threat to national security, well, you're going to get the electric chair. Julius is guilty. Ethel, she was probably innocent, but she's married to him, so, you know, together at last, I guess. Moving on, strikes. You need to know that the 1920s and 1950s are almost identical to each other, and after World War I, you had strikes, and after World War II, you have strikes because the economy is shifting from producing for war to, well, what are we producing for now? Like, the economy is not jumping up and down. And so the Taft-Hartley Act basically said, made life more difficult for unions. So the power of the unions goes way, way, way down. And that's basically all you need to know in terms of strikes. Moving on to the Civil Rights Movement. Truman has a committee that he sends all across the United States, and he wants to know what life is like for minority groups in America. And they say, Mr. President, life is not very good. And they write an article called To Secure These Rights, which is ultimately going to lead to Truman to desegregate the military and the armed services, and military, which is the armed services and government jobs, and that is Executive Order 9981. And Jackie Robinson breaks the colored barrier. Check out the movie 42 if you want more information on that. But just know that the Civil Rights Movement is really starting to begin. 22nd Amendment, pretty simple. 2 terms for president. FDR could have served 4 terms. He was elected to 4 terms, ended up dying. So basically we need to set some parameters. 2 terms for president. Washington served 2 terms. No one else should serve more than 2. Like, how can you beat Washington, right? And then in terms of culture, GI Bill of Rights. The United States is going to give veterans for the first time benefits, and one of these benefits is low interest loans to buy a house, and more importantly, free college for them and discounts for their family. So Americans are going to college as never before. They're also coming home and having babies. It didn't make a lot of sense in the Great Depression to have a lot of kids because you couldn't provide for them, and then you go off to World War II. And so you're going to see the population of the United States boom, 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 going up, and more Americans in the middle class. All right, and they're moving to the suburbs and what's known as white flight. White people are moving away from the cities and into the burbs, baby, because now we've got cars, we're going to have the better roads. And so it's nice visiting the city on the weekend to go to the park, go to the store, go to the big ball game, but then you come back home to your nice picket fence house, watching your TV and living in your Levitt home, and the Levitt home was a mass-produced home. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes Harry S. Truman and the nitty-gritty of what you need to know. As you can tell, there is a lot of information. So you need to really take your time and make sure that you absorb the information. That way you're ready to rock that AP exam coming up in a little bit. Woo-woo! Have a good day.